The girl he brought home that day. It started on a Tuesday. Rain was falling hard that morning, and I was already late to work when I saw my husband, Daniel, standing on the porch with a little girl gripping his hand. She couldn't have been more than 5. Thin frame, oversized hoodie, wide eyes like she'd been taught not to speak unless spoken to. "This is Emma," he said, a little breathless. "She's Mike's daughter. Remember Mike? My old college buddy?" I nodded, confused. He got into some trouble real bad. He asked me to take care of her for a while." I blinked. "A while? Like a day or just a few weeks, babe?" "Just until things calmed down for him." He didn't wait for me to say yes. He just bent down and whispered something to Emma and then led her inside. That was the day my world changed, and I didn't even know it. I made her hot cocoa. She didn't say thank you, just stared at the cup like it might disappear. I asked Daniel for more details, where Mike was, what trouble meant, if he had custody paperwork. He deflected. "Mike's dealing with legal stuff. Long story, let's not get caught up in it." "But she's a child, Daniel. We can't just—" "She's already been through enough," he said. "Just be kind. That's all I'm asking." I looked at Emma. She looked at her feet. And just like that, I said, "Okay." Weeks turned into months. Emma settled in like mist. She never demanded attention, but her presence filled the corners of our home. She was quiet, observant, unnervingly mature for her age. And slowly, she became mine. I signed her up for kindergarten, braided her hair for class photos, slept beside her when she had nightmares. Daniel seemed distant at first, always hesitant when I praised her, always too careful. But I thought maybe he was just nervous. This wasn't his child, it wasn't mine either. Or so I thought. The only odd thing? Emma never mentioned her real dad. Never asked about Mike. I once asked her if she missed him. She shrugged. "I have a daddy already." "You mean Daniel?" She nodded. "But I'm not supposed to tell." My stomach tightened. "Not supposed to tell what, sweetheart?" She went silent, then whispered, "He said we're playing pretend, just for now." I confronted Daniel that night. "What does she mean by pretend?" He looked caught off guard, then annoyed. "She's 5, babe. They say weird stuff." "She said you told her not to tell anyone you're her dad." He tensed. "That's not what I said." "Then what did you say?" "Look, I didn't want to confuse her. Mike and I were best friends. I've known Emma since she was born. Maybe she got attached. Maybe she's just making things up." Something in his voice was off. Something in his eyes said, "Don't dig." But I did. Not right away. Not in ways that made him suspicious, but in the small ways. The kind women learn when they've been gaslighted before. I found an old photo in a box he'd hidden in the attic. Emma was a toddler in it, and Daniel was holding her. Not like an uncle, not like a family friend, like a father. His smile wasn't posed. It was paternal, protective, tender. The photo was dated 2 years before he said Mike reached out. My hands shook. I confronted him again. This time he didn't deflect. He just looked at me, defeated. "You wouldn't have stayed," he said softly, "if I told you." "Stayed? I cheated years ago. Emma's mine." I couldn't breathe. My legs folded underneath me. All the nights I stayed up with her. All the school pickups, the fevers, the drawings she made for Father's Day that said "to Daddy." All the times I wondered why she looked more like Daniel than Mike. It was all there. The truth had been living in my house, calling me by my first name, never Mom, because she already had a mother. And I was just the woman who stepped in. I had raised his child, loved her like my own, while he sat beside me every day, watching me pour myself into a secret. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because I couldn't risk losing you," he said. "And I knew once she was here, you'd love her. How could you not?" He was right. I did love her. And that was what hurt the most. She called me by my name, not Mom. After Daniel's confession, I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't even cry. I just sat there. Because sometimes pain doesn't come in waves. It settles. Quietly. Like dust on every surface of the life you thought was clean. I had tucked her in 1,000 times. Wiped her tears, packed her lunches, read her bedtime stories with a cracked voice after long days. And every time she said, "Good night, Clara." Not Mom, not even Auntie, just Clara. I used to think she was shy. Or that maybe she didn't understand what I was to her. But now I knew. She was told, she was taught, to never call me Mom. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was in the smallest details. The way Daniel never corrected her. The way she avoided Mother's Day with crafts only for Dad. The way Daniel smiled every time she said Daddy. While I smiled for both of us, thinking I was enough. That night I sat outside her bedroom door. She was asleep, breathing slow and even. She looked peaceful. I didn't. I looked like someone who'd been left out of her own story. The next morning, she woke up like nothing had changed. And to her, maybe it hadn't. She smiled and held up a drawing. It was a picture of her and Daniel. Stick figures, two people holding hands. Look, she said, it's me and Daddy. That's beautiful, I whispered. I'm gonna give it to him. That's wonderful, sweetheart. And she ran down the hall. I stood there, with shaking hands and a heart I wasn't sure I could hold anymore. Daniel tried to talk that evening. I wanted to tell you, he said. Every day I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Because I saw how much you loved her. And I was scared that once you knew the truth, you wouldn't look at either of us the same. I turned to him. You're right, I don't. He looked gutted. But I wasn't here to console him. This wasn't about his guilt. It was about the years he let me live a lie that I mothered. She never called me Mom, Daniel? He nodded slowly. I asked her not to. That was it. No excuse, no justification. Just truth. And it hit harder than any lie. Do you know what that did to me? I asked. I had to love her like she was mine, and still feel like a guest in my own motherhood. He looked down. She would have loved you, he whispered. She does. I was too much of a coward to let it happen naturally. You were too much of a coward to tell me who she really was. We didn't talk the rest of the night. And when I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember who I was before Emma came into my life. I couldn't, because she was my life, even if I wasn't hers. The next day, she gave me another drawing. This time, it had 3 figures. Me, her, and Daniel. I wanted to cry. Because in the picture, she drew a heart between us. But above my head, she didn't write Mom. She just wrote Clara. I smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "Thank you, baby. This means a lot to me." And it did. Because even if the title was missing, the love in the lines was real. But that night, when she was asleep, I wrote her a note. I tucked it under her pillow. It said, "No matter what you call me, you'll always be my girl. Clara." I started to wonder if I meant anything at all. The days blurred together after that. I still packed Emma's lunch, still braided her hair, still listened to her stories about school and friends and the silly boy in class who always tripped over his shoelaces. But something had shifted, not in her, in me. I started to move through the house like a guest, like someone waiting to be asked to leave. Every time she called Daniel Daddy, I smiled. But inside, something flinched. Every time she said my name, Clara, with that sweet, innocent voice, I felt the sting of absence. Not hers, mine. I had poured myself into this family, built it with scraped knuckles and sleepless nights and whispered prayers. And now I didn't even know if I was real in it. Daniel tried to act like things were the same. He brought me coffee in the mornings, made bad jokes at dinner, even tried to plan a weekend trip, just the 3 of us. But the truth sat between us like a 4th chair at the table. Silent, heavy, uninvited. One night, while brushing Emma's hair, she looked up and asked, "Do you think my real mom misses me?" I froze. "Of course she does," I said after a beat too long. She nodded. "Daddy says she couldn't take care of me, but she loved me a lot." I'm sure that's true. Do you love me? That question. So simple. So massive. Yes, baby, I whispered, kneeling to her level. I love you more than anything. She smiled, hugged me. But she still didn't say Mom. And that night, I cried harder than I had in years. Daniel found me in the bathroom, sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, trying to breathe through the ache. "Clara," he said softly, "don't. Please." You took that from me, I said. You took her from me even while you let me raise her. He sat beside me. You still have her. Do I? Do I really? He looked down. You mean everything to her. Then why am I always Clara? Why don't I get to be Mom when I've done everything a mother does? His silence was the loudest answer. I started to wonder, I continued, if I was ever really part of this family, or if I was just the one filling in the blanks while you protected your secret. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. You made me into a lie, I whispered, and now I don't know if any of it was ever real. He opened his mouth to respond, but I stood up and walked away. Some wounds don't need explanations, they just need space. That night I slept in Emma's bed. She curled beside me like she used to when she had nightmares. Only this time, the nightmare was mine. I watched her tiny fingers rest on mine, her breathing soft and even. I loved this child, more than logic, more than pride, more than betrayal. But I didn't know if I could keep pretending that this was enough. The next morning, I didn't pack her lunch. Daniel did. And when she asked, "Is Clara mad at me?" he hesitated, then said, "She's just tired." She came to me with her drawing pad later that day, handed me a picture. It was us, her, me, Daniel. But this time, she drew a line, a faint one, between me and the other 2. Why the line? I asked gently. Because Daddy says I shouldn't confuse people. Confuse them how? By calling you Mom because you're not. I held the paper, nodded. smiled even, but inside, I broke. The day I almost walked away from both of them. I packed my suitcase in silence. Not because I was angry, not even because I wanted to hurt Daniel, but because I felt like I didn't belong. Not here, not anymore. Every room in this house had memories. Emma's first fever, her first steps on the carpet I just had cleaned, her first birthday cake that collapsed in the middle, and we laughed and ate it anyway. Every hallway still echoed with laughter and bedtime songs. But I no longer heard myself in those echoes, only her voice and his. Never mind. I left the suitcase by the door, sat on the edge of the couch, waiting for courage to become action. Daniel walked in. He saw the suitcase, his face dropped. Clara, just don't. He stepped forward. You're not doing this. I'm not doing anything, I snapped. You did this. You built a lie and handed it to me like it was love. I love you. No, you needed me. His eyes filled with panic. Emma needs you. Then why did you teach her I wasn't hers? Silence. She doesn't know how to place me, I whispered. Because you made sure she wouldn't. And now neither do I. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned away. Coward. I grabbed my coat, reached for the suitcase. Tears burned, but I didn't let them fall. If I cried now, I'd stay. And if I stayed, I'd lose myself piece by piece. Just as I opened the door, Clara? The voice was small. Not Daniel's. Emma's. I turned. She stood at the hallway's end in her pajamas, holding her stuffed bunny, eyes swollen from sleep. She rubbed one eye. Where are you going? I swallowed. Hard. I just need a little break, sweetheart. Did I do something wrong? That, right there. That was the moment. The one that snapped something inside me and stitched it back in the same breath. No, I said, walking toward her. You did nothing wrong. I knelt down, cupping her cheeks. You are perfect, okay? She nodded slowly. Then she whispered, I want you to be my mom. My heart stopped. I know you're not for real. But when I draw pictures, sometimes I want to write mom. I hugged her. Tight. Tighter than I ever had. And finally, I cried. Not because I was leaving, but because she had just asked me to stay. Behind us, I heard footsteps. Daniel. But I didn't look at him. I only looked at her and whispered, I'm not going anywhere. That night, I unpacked my suitcase, not because Daniel deserved another chance, but because Emma did. Because for the first time she had seen me, not as Clara, not as the woman in the house, but as the mother who chose her. Even when I didn't have to, she finally called me Mom. But it was bittersweet. The morning after I stayed, Emma was glued to my side. Like her little body sensed that she had almost lost something she didn't know she had. She followed me into the kitchen, into the laundry room, even sat on the bathroom floor while I brushed my teeth. Daniel gave us space. Not because he understood, but because maybe for once he knew to stop inserting himself into something he didn't build. I didn't talk much that day. I didn't have to. Emma did all the talking. About her class hamster. About the cupcake that fell icing first at lunch. About how she wanted to be a sky painter when she grew up. You mean an artist? No, she grinned. A painter that colors the sky, like the people who make sunsets. My heart ached, because I had once imagined being her everything, and now I was just grateful to be her someone. That evening, she started to feel warm. Hot, actually. I touched her forehead. Burning. I grabbed the thermometer. 2.7. Then 103.5. Then and saw war. Her breathing turned shallow. Her skin flushed. Daniel, I called, get the car. We rushed to the ER. She clung to me like a vine, didn't speak, didn't cry, just buried her face in my shoulder. In the hospital room, they ran tests. Eve oxygen. I stroked her hair, whispering, You're okay, baby, I'm here, I've got you. Then came the moment. She opened her eyes, glassy, afraid, and whispered, Mom? I froze. The word lingered in the air like a wish finally spoken. Yes, I choked out. I'm here. She gripped my hand tighter. Don't leave me. Never, I said. Never, ever. Daniel stepped forward, but she turned away from him. She only wanted me. For the first time, she didn't care about biology. She just cared that I was holding her. After she fell asleep, I stepped out to breathe. Daniel followed. She called you Mom. I nodded, numb. You okay? He asked. I don't know. I thought that's what you wanted. It is, I whispered. But not like this, not with her burning up and scared out of her mind. He looked down. You earned that word a long time ago. Then why did you try to take it from me? He had no answer. Just guilt. And it wasn't enough. That night, I sat by Emma's bedside, held her tiny hand while machines beeped gently around us. I watched her chest rise and fall, watched her fingers twitch in dreams. And I realized something. She didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to stay. When morning came, her fever broke. She woke up groggy. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice raspy, and I smiled. A real smile. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally been made right. I found the letters he hid from me. Emma was home. Her fever had passed, but something in her eyes had changed. She was quieter, more aware, and she clung to me in a way that felt different. Not desperate, but certain, like she'd made her choice. And somehow, so had I. Daniel was more careful now, tiptoeing, soft-voiced, like he knew he was walking beside a woman who could leave any minute and was just looking for a reason not to. But he didn't know I already had one. Emma. Still, the air between us was heavy. There were questions I hadn't asked, and answers I feared might break the fragile peace we were trying to hold. But the truth doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It waits for silence. And that's where it finds you. It found me on a rainy Thursday. Emma was napping. Daniel had left for groceries. I was searching for an old photo album in the hallway closet when I saw a small wooden box wedged behind a stack of winter coats. It wasn't locked, but it was sealed shut with a single piece of black ribbon. Something about that ribbon felt sacred. Or secret. Or both. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Yellowing paper, faded ink, some folded once, some many times over. They were addressed in the same handwriting. Delicate, careful. To Emma. For when you're older. To Daniel. I'm sorry. To whom it may concern. Please forgive me. And one, to the woman who would raise her. My heart stopped. I opened that one. I don't know your name. I don't know who you are. But if you're reading this, then he chose you. And you chose her. I wasn't strong enough to stay. I wasn't well. Daniel tried, he begged me. But I couldn't be a mother when I didn't even know how to be a person. I hope you love her. Hope she loves you. Please don't tell her I was a monster. Tell her I was broken. And that I gave her up not because I didn't want her, but because I wanted her to be whole. I read it again. And again. My hands trembled. My throat burned. And then I cried. Not for me, not for Daniel, but for a woman I'd never met, whose pain had been buried beneath my anger for so long. I sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by her words. The ones Daniel never showed me, never told me about. When he came home, I was still on the hallway floor, the box open beside me. His face turned pale. Where did you find those? In the closet. Clara, you should have told me. I didn't want to reopen everything. It was already so hard. For you? I snapped. What about me? I loved that child through your lies. I wiped her tears. I held her when she was sick. And all this time, there was another woman who once loved her too. And I never knew. He sat across from me, hands in his lap. She left the letters the day she signed the papers. She asked me to wait until Emma was older. And the one for me? I didn't think you'd want to read it. That wasn't your decision. We sat in silence. Rain tapped softly on the windows. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls had pulled in tighter around the truth we'd tried to ignore. Do you hate me? He asked. No, I said quietly, but I don't trust you. Can we fix that? I don't know. That night I read every letter. Some were filled with pain, others with love. Some sounded like goodbye. Some like hope. The last one was simply signed, Love Sophia, Emma's first mother. I folded it gently, placed it in my drawer beside the photo of Emma on her first day of school, and whispered, You weren't a monster. You were just lost. And I'll make sure Emma knows both parts of her story. All of it. The pain, the love, and the women who chose her. Emma asked me the one question I wasn't ready for. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was unusually clear. Emma had just come home from school, her cheeks rosy from the wind, a crayon drawing of a rainbow clutched in her tiny hands. We were sitting on the couch. She was curled beside me, head on my shoulder, legs tucked under a blanket. It felt perfect still, safe, until she spoke. Clara? Am I different? I turned. Different how, sweetie? From other kids. I blinked. No, why would you think that? She hesitated, then whispered, Because I have two moms, but I only live with one, and Daddy doesn't talk about the other. My breath caught. Where did you hear that? A girl at school said I must have been adopted, because I don't look like you. And she heard her mom say I wasn't really yours. My hands clenched around the blanket. Emma, she looked up. If you're not my real mom, then why did you stay? That was it. The question. Sharp, innocent, unfiltered. And it went straight through my chest. I didn't speak for a moment. Because how do you explain a love that wasn't born in a hospital room, but was built in every scraped knee, every bedtime song, every whispered, "It's okay," in the middle of the night? How do you tell a child that sometimes the people who stay are more real than the ones who gave you life? I cupped her face gently. Emma, I'm not the mom who gave birth to you. That's true. But I am the mom who stayed up when you were sick, who learned how to braid your hair just the way you like, who cried when you took your first step because I was there to see it. Her eyes glistened. But why? I smiled through the tears. Because I chose you. Over and over, even when I was hurt, even when I didn't know the truth. I still chose you. She stared at me for a long moment, then asked, "Did my other mom love me too?" I nodded. Very much. She was just very sad. So sad she didn't know how to be a mommy. But she wrote you letters. She never forgot you. Can I read them someday? When you're ready. She laid her head back on my shoulder, and after a long silence, she whispered, "I think you're my real mom too." I froze, then held her tighter. Not because I needed her to say it, but because I finally believed it myself. Later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen. Daniel walked in quietly. "She told me what she asked you." I nodded. "She needed the truth. You gave her more than that." He sat across from me. "You gave her something I never could. Not with all the lies I tried to protect her from. She doesn't need protecting, Daniel. She needs honesty. She needs us to be brave enough to let her love all the parts of her story, even the hard ones." He looked down, ashamed. "You think she'll ever forgive me?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know this. She's already forgiven me. And that's what made me stay. The day we told her everything and she made her choice. We decided to tell her on a Sunday. It was sunny outside. Blue sky, calm breeze. One of those rare, peaceful mornings that felt borrowed from someone else's life. Emma was on the porch drawing with chalk. A rainbow. A house. 3 stick figures. I stood by the window watching her. She looked happy. "Are we doing the right thing?" Daniel asked beside me. "The right thing," I whispered, "isn't always the easiest." We waited until after lunch. Emma was curled up on the couch, her bunny in her arms. Daniel and I sat on either side of her, the air tight with unspoken words. "Sweetheart," I began, "can we talk to you about something important?" She looked up, eyes calm. Older somehow than her 7 years. "Okay," she said. Daniel took a deep breath. "You remember when you asked about your other mom?" She nodded. "Her name was Sophia," I said gently. "She loved you. She was very sad, but she wanted the best for you. That's why she asked Daddy to take care of you." Emma blinked slowly. "So that's why I don't remember her?" "Yes," Daniel said, voice trembling. "She left when you were very little." "And Clara?" I turned toward her, my heart pounding. "I didn't know at first. Daddy told me you were his friend's daughter. But I loved you from the moment I saw you. Even when I didn't know the truth. I loved you like my own." She stared at me, then at Daniel. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Her voice wasn't angry, just confused. Daniel swallowed hard, "Because I was scared. I thought if I told the truth, I'd lose both of you." Emma looked down. Her tiny hands gripped the edge of her dress. "You lied." "Yes," I said before Daniel could answer. "He did, but he also loves you. We both do. And you deserve to know everything. So you can decide for yourself what it all means." She sat in silence, then whispered, "So, Clara's not my first mom, but she's my forever mom?" I felt tears rise. "Only if you want me to be." She looked up at me. "Can I still call you Mom?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. She crawled into my lap, wrapped her arms around my neck, and whispered, "Then you're my real mom, because you stayed." That night, we read one of Sophia's letters together. Just one. Emma asked questions. Some we could answer, some we couldn't. But for the first time, we didn't avoid the truth. We made space for it. Not to erase the pain, but to let it live beside the love. Daniel apologized again. To me, to her. But this time it wasn't desperate. It was real. He knew he'd broken something. And now he was willing to rebuild it. Brick by honest brick. Weeks passed. Emma started saying my mom at school. She told her teacher I was her mom, not by birth, but by heart. One afternoon, she brought home a drawing. It was a picture of 3 women, one with a sad face, one with a heart on her chest, and one in the clouds, smiling. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to the one in the clouds. "That's Sophia. She's happy now." I held back tears. "And the one with the heart?" "You, because you kept mine safe." Sometimes I still feel the ache of how it all began. The lies, the silence, the nights I felt invisible in my own home. But then I hear her voice. "Mom, can you help with this?" Or feel her little arms wrap around me. "I missed you." And I know this love was real all along, even if the story took a while to get there. She wasn't born from me, but she was born into me. Every day, every breath, every second I chose to stay. End of part 8. Final chapter. Thank you for listening. Guess what? Love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. It just has to be chosen over and over again. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.